Hello everyone, it's Ursula Cullen here from FlowForma. I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, 2021 Process Automation Predictions Revisited. So in January of this year, myself and Paul hosted a webinar where we spoke about the 2021 process automation predictions that we had. And now, 8 months later, we're here again, joined by an additional individual from FlowForma to revisit those process automation predictions and see how they've expanded over the last 8 months. So before we get started, I'll just take you through some housekeeping tips. So just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. If you need any assistance during the webinar, you can contact info@flowforma.com. Your lines will be muted throughout the webinar, but if you do have any questions for us today, we please ask you to use the chat functionality and go to webinar, and we will answer your questions at the end. And we will share a copy of this recording, and we do ask if you could also complete a short feedback form towards the end of the webinar too. So, your speakers for today. So, I'm delighted to be joined by two FlowForma colleagues, Paul Stone and Gary Mellows. So, I'll tell you a little bit about both of our individuals today. So, Paul has a vast experience in the IT industry. He uses his in-depth product and domain knowledge to support FlowForma's clients and internal teams. His role as product evangelist and strategist, where he proposes, manages, and communicates the product roadmap, aligning our product with the needs of our clients and the demands of our wider market. Gary joined FlowForma this year, and he is a seasoned technology leader with a strong track record of delivering consistent and sustainable growth for global software SaaS companies, where he's built and led high-performing cross-functional specialist professional services and sales teams. As I said, he joined FlowForma earlier this year as Head of Delivering Customer Success. So welcome both Paul and Gary. Thank you for joining me today. So let's jump straight in to our first prediction. So in January of 2021, we predicted that the great lockdown of 2020 will make the drive for automation inevitable and irreversible in 2021. Paul, maybe we can go to you first and you can share some insight here. Do you still believe that this is the case and going to be the case for the future?
Oh, very much so. And what we see here on the screen is Forrester's updated results. So they carried out a survey to see how people were looking to change in the coming year or two. And what we can see from this is that over 76% of people are looking to implement significant change by adopting digital technologies to automate their processes. It really is quite a staggering change in how people are viewing the way they can progress the business, the way they can keep the business competitive, and so on. So it really is a significant change, and it backs up very much our assumption that, you know, what COVID and the pandemic was going to make a big difference in the way people were going to adopt new digital technologies. Certainly, that's in people's plans right now. And what we've seen in our own customer base and from prospects who are coming to us is that, yeah, they're very interested. There's a much increased interest in adopting digital process automation. A lot of people are asking us as well as how are you going to achieve this? How are you going to do it? And we're providing guidance, and we've got case studies showing how other organizations have done it in the past, and people are finding that really useful and looking to find a path towards making those changes happen. So we can see that a lot of organizations are planning to make those changes, and they're planning to do it in slightly different ways. So we have people who want to completely start from scratch and reimagine their processes. So they're looking to actually take this as a real opportunity to make significant change to their business. That's quite a ambitious thing to do. And normally it's a step that people take with hesitation because there's so much change involved. But you can see here from the figures that 31% of people want to make that change. They want to really make a big difference to the way they operate. Of course, that's being triggered by that pandemic, by the fact that everybody is remote working. They have to change the way they're going to working and work, and they're using that as an opportunity to really make a big difference and make themselves operate more efficiently. The other thing is that people are doing it out of necessity. So there's a necessity aspect here where people are operating, let's say, on manual processes, and they're using paper and so on to pass information between each other. And of course, when people are remote working in the pandemic, that doesn't really work too well. So in fact, further statistics from Forrester show that a very significant proportion of processes are broken within organizations because they're over-reliant on paper. So people are looking to digitize because of that basically manual processes that are reliant on paper communications need to be replaced and digitized. In this case, they may simply digitize the same process that they had before, but at least it's in a digital format and it's accessible, and people can actually act on it through a digital media. Then lastly, that they're looking to transform processes to better support their digital business strategies. So you may be aware that a lot of companies now have a digital strategy, and as part of that digital strategy, they're looking at digital process automation. So digital strategies in the past might have been focused on development, personal productivity tools, small implementations, like the implementation, for example, of Office 365. The implementation of Office 365 is providing digital tools into the hands of the workforce, but introducing digital process automation is making those digital tools productive, right? So it's introducing a new level of productivity within the business. So it's very interesting to see that combined, this comes to 76% of respondents to Forrester's survey. And maybe Ursula, if you can move on to the next slide there. So people, as I said, were looking to us to see how we can make that happen. What can we learn from FlowForma in terms of the way that we've, our clients have used FlowForma to make digitalization a reality. Well, one of the things that we'll always say is that you have to have support, obviously, from within your business. You need to find a champion, a person who's going to stand up and say, yeah, this is the time to change. This is the time now to introduce new digital way of working. And support that and promote that within the organization. And that champion might be a person at the top of the business in the C-suite, or it might be a person at a lower level who has, let's say, in-depth understanding of how the business operates, how it maintains competitiveness in the market, and how digital technologies therefore can really help that business. But what we do find is that the most successful implementations have at the outset a person who's prepared to champion the change to using digital processes. Also then, how do you get started? Well, the way to get started really is to target the obvious processes, the processes that everybody can see are a problem, and typically they're manual processes, and they have difficulty in monitoring the process, keeping the process progress visible to everybody involved, and so on. And they're usually the problem processes that everybody kind of knows about. And these are the processes that you want to target first. So we say target the obvious. And once you introduce digital technology, obviously, you're going to make that process more efficient, beneficial, and you'll be able to see the difference that's happening. And then we say focus on becoming self-sufficient, because you've got a lot of change going on. And if you're basically dependent on IT resources to help you make that change happen, you may run aground over time. So the thing to do is look at a no-code solution. We'll talk a lot more about that later on, to become self-sufficient, so that you can build resilience and actually start introducing programs of continuous improvement, where you're constantly changing and being agile and adapting to the conditions of the world around you. And beware the cost of doing nothing, because if you don't make these changes now, you're going to pay for it later on, as basically your competitors do adopt digital technologies, become more efficient, and ultimately provide a better end user and customer experience, so they have a competitive edge. So just beware of doing nothing at all, because there's so much change going on in the market. As you can see, 76% of respondents say they're going to change. So much change going on. You're at risk of losing your competitive edge if you do nothing at all. And with that, I'd just like to lead on to Gary on one of our great case examples.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Gallagher Group, who's a company we've been working with and went live earlier this year. So Gallagher Group's a leading building, civil engineering, property development company. They're based in Kent in southeast England. The challenge for Gallagher, like many other companies today, is that they had too many manual paper-based processes, you know, causing lots of inefficiencies across the business, and even more so in the pandemic. You know, things simply took too long to get done. They were experiencing poor collaboration across the distributed workforce, lack of visibility to management. They were really keen to reduce the amount of paperwork that was being generated. So the goal for Gallagher was to digitize as many of these manual paper-based processes as possible. Processes such as inspection forms for earthworks, drainage, concrete pours, vents, and paving. The solution needed to be quick and easy to use for Gallagher, enabling them to become self-sufficient fast. You know, they had limited access to IT resources, so it's not a luxury that they had. They also needed to deliver a rapid return on their investment. So one of the great things actually about working with Gallagher was we were working directly with the process owners who knew exactly what they wanted. Were really, really keen to get started. And actually they wanted to do as much of the work themselves. They were so keen to become self-sufficient. So after working with Gallagher for 3 to 4 months, they went live with a whopping 40 plus processes. So think about that time frame, and most of that work they'd done themselves. And since then, that number has increased to over 50 processes now, and still growing. So they're currently working on adding additional HR processes and actually providing mobile access to the distributed workforce. So I think it's a great example of what Paul was just talking about. The company, you know, picked some key processes, got in, delivered the benefits, and are now driving adoption across the business and realizing more and more value from their investments. Sorry, Paul, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, that's a fantastic. No, that's a fantastic example, Gary, of really putting in place change very rapidly. And I think that's something that is being demanded by the market now, that everybody wants to change and they want to change quickly. They don't want to take a year or 2 or 3 to change. They realize they've got to be agile. And Gallagher really took the bull by the horns there by going in and making changes to so many processes in one go. I know that early on, Gary, that both of us would have thought, okay, well, Gallagher will start off maybe with a couple of processes, and 6 months down the line they'll have maybe 10. And we were both, I think, quite shocked to find that they had digitized so many processes so quickly. And for them, it would have been a massive change. This is the company I know who were operating pretty much entirely on paper and spreadsheets, and to have like 40 to 50 digital processes in place in such a short space of time would have been a big change for them, a big positive change as well. And it's great to see that.
I think once we got through the onboarding process with them, our Sure Start process, you know, they picked it up really, really quickly. And really, from a FlowForma perspective, we sat back and simply provided an oversight role, providing best practice advice and guidance when needed. But the reality is, we're so self-sufficient, they just took off.
That's it. I mean,
a well-oiled machine for them.
I think like what we've proven, and not just with this client, but others as well, as you know, and we'll talk more later, but that basically once you get your first 1 or 2 processes digitized, you can digitize more and more very quickly. And the thing is to build up that momentum for change, you know, in the business, and get those processes out there, get them live, and then get the feedback as well. You know, I mean, every process that you put live, I guess, you know, there'll be some feedback that says, oh, well, you know, you need to change that or that, or this, sorry, you need to change this or that to make it more efficient. But you know what, you can put those changes in very quickly. So it's great that they took the bull by the horns and got so many processes out there and live and, you know, being used and so quickly.
Yeah.
Great. I think that's a brilliant example of how we said, you know, preparing today leads you for success tomorrow and for the future. So brilliant example. Great to hear so much success coming from Gallagher. But yeah, so prediction 2. So again, in January of this year, we predicted that digital transformation at more than 3/4 of enterprises will focus on automation. Paul, I'd say that number is a little bit more than 3/4 now. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the focus on automation is really significant, and people are realizing that processes are a good focus for digital transformation. So, as I was saying there earlier on, digital transformation means different things to different people, but ultimately it's a case of adopting digital technology, and you need to have a driver for that. And processes, digital processes are a great driver because processes result in the achievement of business goals. So once you can show that you're achieving business goals through digital processes, you can actually measure the efficiency of that, and it can be a great driver for change within the organization. One of the things we saw from Forrester was that there really is an acceleration of digital business transformation going on right now. And it's partly brought about, I feel, by COVID and the pandemic, but already before that, we were seeing that level of acceleration. What we can see in this graph here is that, well, if you look back 2 years ago, there was about 12% of organizations that wanted to accelerate their change, and right now it's 32, and 2 years from now, it's expected to be 37. So what's that showing is that people want to change, and you might say that, well, that big difference has been triggered by the pandemic, but you know what? 2 years from now, people are still seeing that change is going to be really significant to them. So adopting digital processes, adopting digital technology is going to be significant to the business. Like more than a third of respondents were saying that. So it just shows that adopting digital technology, I guess, is here to stay. You know, it's not something that is a fad. It's not something that's just down to the pandemic. It's something that people are now realizing is going to become essential. And because the pandemic may have triggered the interest in it, but once people start doing it, they will become more efficient in the way they're operating. And from that point, they have to maintain it and improve upon it, right? So they have to implement that continuous improvement approach and be agile and so on. So you know what, the level of interest, if you like, in this area is just going to increase over time. Also, from that graph there, you can also see that customer experience is going to become more and more important. So while it would have been 14% 2 years ago, which is significant enough, it's increased to 25%, and it's going to increase further to 32% in 2 years' time. So improving customer experience is really significant too, and for sure that's going to make a difference to the outward face of your company, the outward face of your processes, and ultimately to your level of competitiveness in the marketplace. Now, people look at customer experience and they think about, oh, well, customer experience, yeah, that's the website that I go to, right? No. Customer experience is very broad. It's the efficiency of your company, and it's how well your company interacts with the customer. How do you deliver those services to your customer? How efficiently do you do it? How happy do you make the customer at the end of the day, which is linked to so many different things. But digital process and the efficiency of your processes is a big part of that. So you can see again that digital transformation and the improvement of customer experience are two things that are very linked together. So as you implement digital transformation, you improve your overall efficiency and you increase the perception and value of your services to your end customers. So the two are, I feel, very closely linked. Also, you can, using certain technologies like FlowForma, extend your digital processes out to your customer. So you can actually involve your customers in those processes directly. And this, again, increases the contact with your customer and ultimately leads to higher customer satisfaction. So those two stats there, I think, are very important. And certainly we're seeing that reflected in our interactions with our own customers and prospects, that that customer experience is something that really is quite significant to them, obviously. Yeah. So a little bit about the background to FlowForma. So FlowForma is a system that operates inside Microsoft 365, and it provides digital processes through the integration of workflow for obviously the execution of tasks, and then forms for data capture during the execution of the tasks, and also document generation and management. So we have an ability to generate documents and communications as well as the workflow is being progressing. And all of this helps your team collaborate with each other so that they can collaborate together to carry out a business process to achieve a business goal. Now, we're quite unusual in the market in that we're a no-code tool, so that people who are not familiar with coding or who are not very technical can actually configure out the processes. And what this means is you can actually configure out, so you can digitize processes very rapidly using non-IT resources. So you're empowering business users using what we call no-code technology. And we'll do a little demonstration later on to show you what that actually means. And with that, I'll just pass on to Gary now for, oh, sorry, I think I'm up for the next the next customer study, excuse me. The next one is Abingdon and Whitney College. It's a very large college with over 4,000 students, and they were very heavily dependent on paper. So they looked to get in a tool to actually help them digitize processes and implement digital solutions. And really what they wanted to do was improve transparency, because they had so many spreadsheets where they were controlling things, and they wanted to have a better reporting. So they wanted to collect data during the execution of processes so they can see the performance of the processes. Of course, a digital process can be recorded, so you're seeing an audit trail, you can capture performance. And they wanted something to also to encourage fast adoption, so that it would be easily available to anybody. In this case, they used FlowForma because it's available via a web browser, via mobile app, and so on, very easily to access. It was very important for them to have a user-friendly solution. And this incidentally was driven by both the IT department, but also by the financial controller. So the financial controller was looking to see better reporting, to have increased visibility, while the IT department was looking for something that was very efficient. So they wanted a no-code tool that they can configure easily, that they didn't have to use programmers to configure. They could use apprentices from the college itself to actually build out the solutions. So the results were very interesting. So they actually were able to measure the performance improvement on their processes because all the data was being captured for them. And as you can see here, the number of hours saved were really quite significant. This was over a 1-year period. So trips and visits process, for example, just one of the processes, they saved 1,665 hours, as you can see here on the slide. Really quite a significant number. And you can see there over the 5 processes that they just took samples of, the total saving was quite significant. And this is just 5 processes. There were many more that they implemented.
Putting that into another perspective, I mean, that's almost 600 man days per year, which would equate to what, Paul, 2 FTEs?
2 FTEs, and that's really significant for a college. A college at the end of the day, they've got tight budgets, and to actually be able to save 2 FTEs really was a significant saving. And that's just on these 5 processes. They implemented others as well. So the overall saving that they were making was really significant, which of course made the sponsor, the financial controller, a very happy man. But yeah, it was a really significant change, and it was great to see as well that they responded very well to the applications. That they were highly adopted by the people in the college, and also the people who configure the applications became big fans and supporters of FlowForma. They were very keen to having. One of the things we see again and again, I guess, Gary, and you would see this too, is that once people have that early success, once they built that first process and they see they're onto a winner, they're very keen then, of course, to build the next one and the next one and the next one. And that's really what happened in Abingdon and Whitney. And they were able to do that because, of course, they were able to measure the results. You're able to measure the actual performance of your processes once they're digitized. So you can see the benefit that's being gained from it all.
Great.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Paul. So the third prediction then, and it'd be great to get your insights again, Paul and Gary, were that 2/3 of enterprise organizations encountered broken processes during the pandemic. Again, I think probably we thought we know that it was probably more than 2/3 of enterprise organizations. But Paul, maybe you could start and share what type of processes were broken and what the benefits are of digitizing those processes.
Yeah, sure. Like one thing we noticed was that anybody who was dependent on the paper process really broke down, and they had to revert to using emails and email chains and so on, and then trying to control the process, they'd have to control it on spreadsheets and whatever. So really, if you had a paper-based process, you were in trouble during the pandemic. And people were falling back to working in collaborative environments like Microsoft Teams, for example, which is Teams is great for meetings and so on. But if you're trying to execute business processes based on the meetings that you're having, it's not so easy. So one of the things that we did was we actually built a Teams application that would sit inside Teams. I can show you briefly later on the demonstration. And what that did was allowed people to collaborate with purpose. So rather than just having a Teams meeting and then having to send an email and having that email passed around and so on, you could actually you could rate the activity in your Teams environment to a task and a workflow that produced an end result, achieved a business goal, and so on. So it was really helping people work together and collaborate with purpose. Also, that one of the things we saw was that people really needed to move away from paper. So if you had a paper process, like I said earlier, it was broken, they needed to move away from paper. But one of the big advantages, of course, of doing that was that all the data that you're now capturing electronically was available for reporting. So you were able to get access to a lot of information that you couldn't get access to before because you were stuck on paper. So a really kind of positive thing, I think, from the pandemic is that it forced people to move away from paper. And the big side advantage of that was that you got all that data available for reporting and analytics. So that was a really big change that came about. The other thing is to say that we talked earlier on there about the adoption of digital technologies and digital processes, and really it's so important that they are adopted. There's no point in building a digital solution that nobody uses. So we really had to have a way of doing things that involved everybody in the building of a process and ultimately encourage them to own the process and have it adopted by the business. And I think FlowForma's approach, which you'll see a little later in the demonstration, encourages that. It makes it easy to adopt. So having that system that's easy to adopt is just so important. And then once you've got a solution in place like that, it drives continuous improvement. So typically on manual-based processes, it's quite difficult to change the manual process. Once the manual process is implemented, you can imagine that if a process is driven by pieces of paper, for example, you actually have to literally change the pieces of paper, edit the pieces of paper, reprint it, so on. It's actually quite difficult to change a manual process, where a digital process is much simpler. You can add in tasks, you can change the data that's being captured and so on very quickly and easily, and then communicate that out to the workforce very quickly and easily as well, and they can adopt the change much more easily than they would have done with a paper-based process. And that helps a lot with continuous improvement. So you can actually measure the performance of your processes and implement changes to those processes to make them more efficient much more easily once the process is digitized. And we found this that people really appreciated this when they did move away from paper to a digital process, that they saw the ability to change and encourage people to adopt digital a whole lot more easily than they would have done before. At the end of the day, all of this is really about increasing workforce productivity, so that in COVID, where you would have been paper-based, your productivity fell through the floor because your processes were broken, pieces of paper couldn't be exchanged, you had to come up with ad hoc ways of replacing that, like writing information, let's say, into an email, sending it on and so on, which reduced the efficiency of that process very significantly, right? But by introducing or replacing that with a digital process-based solution, you're not only getting back to the level that you were before, you're actually going way ahead of that, because a digital solution is going to be more efficient than any paper process is or was in the past. And we can show at minimum of 50% improvement over a paper-based process That's regardless of the pandemic. So one of the things that one of the real positive things out of this is that once people looked to embrace digital processes and started implementing digital processes, they were seeing immediate benefits in terms of their workforce productivity. And that was regardless of where that workforce was. So if the workforce was in an office, or whether the workforce is working from home during the pandemic, working remotely, it doesn't really matter. Digital processes operate wherever you are. All you need is a browser or a mobile device, and you can access that process and track that process. So so that's a real benefit of using digital processes. This is a stat from Forrester that will be of no surprise, I think, to anybody, that a whopping 80% of people who were using paper-based manual routing of tasks were in a difficult position, and they needed to adopt new ways of working. So it's really interesting to see this statistic, because people might think in this modern age that everybody's using digital technology, right? The truth of it is, an enormous percentage of people are still using paper-based solutions. And it's really staggering. I found it very staggering to see that it was 80% of respondents were still using paper-based processes. And of course, just like I said earlier on, these paper-based processes during the pandemic are basically broken processes. They're running very inefficiently because people are having to replace the paper with email chains and so on. So, which is significantly reducing the efficiency of the process. So 80% of people who are still using paper-based processes are really getting an efficiency dip as a result of the pandemic, and desperately need to change. And that's kind of reflected in the stats on the very first slide, where we talked about 76% of respondents looking to change and adopt digital technology. And this is why, And then it's interesting as well to see 99%, whoa, almost 100% of people are dependent on electronic manual routing. What does that mean? Electronic manual routing means essentially emails, where they're using emails to drive task execution. And it's quite an inefficient and unreliable way of doing it. Because an email may get missed, it may get overlooked, and then it needs to be resent, and so on. It's not a very good way of executing a process. It's almost impossible to track a process when it's executed on an email chain. So, if you can't track a process, you're running into scenarios where you can't measure the efficiency of the process. You're also going to end up in situations where a process has to be rerun and rerun and rerun before the business goal is achieved. So it really is a very inefficient way. And if you're adopting a digital process, you're tracking it automatically. So you automatically have visibility of the process. Anybody can see where it is at any point in time, and who's currently working on it, and when they're expected to deliver on it, etc. So really to move away from that electronic manual routing is going to have a significant positive impact on your organization. And as I say again, it really was staggering to see that 99% of respondents were dependent on those email chains still. But that's the truth of it. But the positive side of all this is that 76% of them are looking to change. And I think change is definitely something that's badly needed. So I'll just pass over to Gary, sorry, for our next case study.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Morgan Construction and Environmental, who are a privately owned civil construction and environmental company based in Edmonton, Alberta, in Canada. They provide major project expertise in industries such as oil and gas, mining, municipal and private infrastructure throughout Western Canada. They're a growing business with a high volume of employees and contractors across the various sites and projects that they serve. So they would have 200 plus resources across these projects at any one time. Like the previous example, they were heavily dependent on time-consuming manual processes, which involves excessive paperwork, sign-offs, approvals took far too long. To give you an example, the recruiting team and the project coordination team at Morgan, they use a joint shared spreadsheet that would, at any one time, would be updated by up to 15 people. So you can imagine this was prone to human error, provided a lack of visibility, updates to key stakeholders in the business. So Morgan were looking for a solution that would help them to better organise, track and manage the resources across their projects, but also provide them with more timely and accurate reporting to the key stakeholders, especially the site leadership and the customers themselves. Working through a partner of ours in the region, Pontum Innovations, we started working with a recruitment team on two key processes, namely the position request process and the employee onboarding process. The position request process was really used for tracking staffing needs on sites, and the employee onboarding process was for processing of those new employees once the position requests have been filled. So we worked with them through the onboarding process, or led by Pontum, it must be said, through the onboarding process, Sure Start. And they were the two processes we got up and running, we focused on. And maybe just to quote the director of corporate at Morgan, Carolyn McCaughey, I'll just read out a comment she gave back. So the digital workflow built with FlowForma has helped bring automation into the recruitment onboarding process, taking what was a giant Excel spreadsheet with endless data entry that had outgrown its capabilities and combined it into a process flow that is very intuitive to use. The business logic built into FlowForma saves us lots of time and increases the data integrity because the data is only touched once. My team is very excited to have this digital workflow in place. That's directly back to the customer themselves. And since then, we've been working with their fleet management side of the business on various fleet management processes, such as tracking of assets and updates, equipment transfers and hauls, repair requests, and preventative maintenance checklists. We've also been working with our accounting team on the expense submission and approval process, both of which are in the final stages of testing and actually due to go live in September. So again, I think Morgan is a great example again where they got started with two key processes, quickly demonstrating the benefits to the business, and they've now continued since then to drive the adoption and drive further value in FlowForma and process automation to across the rest of the business, so further increasing their investment. So I think it's another great example similar to Gallagher of getting started, demonstrating the benefits, getting up and running quickly, and then going from there. Once you do that, you're flying, as Paul said earlier on. It's getting that first step, and that really is the way to get the other stakeholders across the business bought into the process. Paul, I missed anything there?
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I mean, it's very interesting the way Morgan has gone, and I totally agree with you there, Gary. It's getting started. That's the key thing. So as long as you get that ball rolling, you'll find success and return on investment on investment in FlowForma digital technologies very quickly, and then once you can see that, it's a whole lot easier then to keep building that momentum for change. So it's great to see so much success with Morgan, that they implemented all these changes to such a very positive result. Yeah, so that's great to see that.
Yeah, brilliant. I really love the success story at Morgan. And it's great that one of the FlowForma customers is, using going off the back of those broken processes that were on Excel and moving them forward into digital. So brilliant story there. Thanks very much for sharing. The final prediction then that we shared again in January was that automation will advance to support 1 in 4 home workers. Now we know that new working from home mandates are taking place across the world. So Paul and Gary, maybe you can share your thoughts on this and what's ahead for the future.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective, working from home is kind of here to stay, as far as I can see. What we're not seeing at the moment is a rush back to the offices, even though vaccination programs, in some countries at least, are very extensive. You still don't see people returning to the offices en masse, and with many companies saying, don't return until 2022, or companies saying, you know what, we're going to move into a hybrid mode, seems to be the most common approach, where people can return on a 1 or 2 day a week basis. So what we're seeing there is that, like, the remote working, I feel very much is here to stay. So you need to have systems that are going to support that. And that's not just having Teams or working off solutions like Zoom. I mean, because you need more than that. You need a process management solution that's going to help you remain productive while you're working remotely. So that's something that we're definitely seeing. And I think 1 in 4 is an underestimate, that it's going to be more than that who are going to become dependent on digital process technology, significantly more. So that would be my contribution.
And there's no doubt we've seen that ourselves in the demand. We've seen the spike in demand we've seen at the start of the year. It was interesting when the pandemic first hit. It took a while. People, there's a lot of uncertainty. People weren't sure about the impact. But once they started to realize that it was here to stay and things were going to change forever, we weren't going back. The demand went through the roof in terms of, and a lot from the business side, right? Because IT got caught up, IT, skilled resources, development resources got caught up in other priorities. So the business couldn't wait. So we've seen a huge spike in demand from the business users for a no-code solution that would enable them to become self-sufficient and remove that dependency that traditionally they would have had on IT and development resources. And that's been very interesting. And the need for speed, if you like, really looking to accelerate the time to value and get up and running quickly has been something that's been very obvious, and we're still seeing. So yeah, there's no doubt. I think 1 in 4 is an underestimate, Paul. I'd agree.
Yeah.
Great, thanks so much, guys. I know we've chatted a little bit about, the differences process automation can make, but I always think that, seeing is believing, and it's great to see an actual tool in action. So Paul is kindly going to show us a quick 10-minute demonstration of FlowForma, and just to give you all a better insight into, what the tool can do, what no code really means. So let me just pop over to Paul here.
Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my screen here.
Yep, looks good.
That's great. Thanks, Ursula. So FlowForma is a process automation product, and the way you typically access FlowForma is via a web browser. So I'm happy to be using, I think, Microsoft Edge here, but we support all modern web browsers. And when you go into a FlowForma, you will typically go in via a dashboard. Now, this is our standard FlowForma landing page, and here you can see some processes that I want to initiate, like the onboarding, employee onboarding, change requests, incident management, and so on. And down here, we see some tiles that show me processes in different statuses. So for example, here I can see FlowForms awaiting my input. These are processes that are currently assigned to me, and I can quickly go in and see what processes are assigned to me. So people are typically accessing the system via a web browser, but we also support a mobile access. So you can access via mobile devices, or indeed, also we have a Teams application that allows you to access FlowForma via Microsoft Teams. Now, when you are initiating a process, you just click on, in this case, it's a tile on the screen, and what happens is the process opens up as a form. So this form here is showing us a series of steps in the process. So this, by the way, is what a typical end user is going to see. So your business user is going to open up a process like this. They're going to see some steps in the process in an area we call the step bar. And what the step bar does is it shows you where you are right now in the process. So right now I'm on new hire details, the very first step. And then these steps will be executed as the process progresses. Now, each of these steps in the process is assigned to an individual or to a group of users so that only the assigned resources can carry out the task. So for example, I might kick off this new hire details here, but the employee manager for the relevant department that the employee is working, they'll carry out the employee manager review. Now the system has an inbuilt security layer so that basically only the assigned resource can carry out their appropriate tasks. And as the workflow progresses, the highlighted step changes so that the user can very quickly see where they are in the workflow right now, what's happened in the past, and what's going to happen in the future. So the step bar is dynamic, and the resource assignments can also be dynamic. So for example, if the employee is going to work in the IT department, the IT manager will carry out the manager review. If they're going to work in finance, the finance manager will carry them out. So basically, the resource assignments to all of the steps as you progress through the workflow is dynamic. Now, if you look below that area, what you see is a series of fields, data, that need to be captured to complete this particular step. So in order for me to register a new hire, I've got to go in and enter some data here. Now, as I'm entering in the data, the system can validate the data and carry out all sorts of calculations. It can also push and pull information out of a backend system. So here, for example, as I'm typing in my name, it's automatically completing the full name by adding those two pieces of information together. We support a wide array of data types that you might want to capture. And as I say, you can validate the data as you're entering it. It can also push and pull information out of other systems as well. So let's say you had a CRM system or a HR system in the background. It can push and pull information out of that. So you're filling in this form, and the whole objective is to complete all the mandatory fields and have valid information inside. And then what you do is you decide to progress this information forward. So if I jump down to the end, I'm just going to type in one piece of information here. Sorry, just type in the name of the department. And what you find is that the system then changes the form to capture the manager name of the department. So I'm just going to put in my own name, excuse me. And it automatically validates that name to ensure that it's a valid user. And then what it will do is dynamically assign that employee manager review step to this user, in this case, myself. I can also attach documents. So we support a wide array of types of data that you can capture, from simple pieces of text to usernames like Paul Stone here, or I can capture information from a drop-down, or even graphical information. I can upload documents, I can upload images, I can edit those images, and so on. So a wide range of information. When all the information is captured for one particular step, I press submit, and it automatically moves on to the next appropriate step in the workflow. In this case, it's the employee manager review. Now, when I see this step, you'll see that the data is very, very different. So this would normally be assigned to the employee manager, but I've assigned it to myself for the purpose of the demonstration. And down here, I can read some instructions here and then decide if I want to accept the details or reject them. What details am I accepting? Well, if I look at the new hire details step here, I can see the information of the new employee, and then I can decide to accept or reject. If I say reject, what happens is it asks me why. So I have to enter in this information as to why I rejected it. And then when I press submit, it will automatically loop back to the first step and send the person who submitted the details an email with this rejection message inside it. In this case, I want to accept it and press submit, and it automatically then moves on to the next step in the workflow. Now, in this case here, I have 3 steps that are going to happen in parallel. So HR are going to get signed off contracts from the employee. IT are going to set up the employee on various systems, and then security are going to assign the employee a door pass and so on, and maybe give them a parking space, and they'll enter in here what parking space they're going to be assigned and so on. So these 3 steps here are going to happen in parallel by different people in the organization. So the system in the back end has a full workflow engine that allows you to operate parallel tasks, also link processes together, sub-processes and so on. And at the end of the day, it can handle pretty much any workflow that you might want to digitize. But it always presents that workflow in a nice simple format to the end user, ensuring that the end user is going to adopt the process at the end of the day. I'm just going to close this process here and show you what another process looks like. And simply that's to show you that the process will look very, very similar. So every process that you deploy in FlowForma has the same general user interface. Now this process is more complicated. It's a purchase requisition process. The data is more complicated and so on. But the progression through the workflow is very similar. And that's all designed so that the user community can adopt those processes easily. Even though you might implement many different processes, they all work kind of the same way, same kind of user interface. Now, in terms of configuring those processes, so let's say you're a process designer, this is the view that you might see. So here we can see there's a series of steps in that employee onboarding process that we looked at, and these steps are added into the workflow by filling in a form. So if I want to add any new step into this workflow, I click on plus step, type in the name of the step, add it in, and then it automatically gets added into the end of the workflow. I drag it up to the appropriate execution point, and then I can click on the step and add in some data. So maybe I want to capture a category, and then I want to make that a drop down. So I'll pick a choice question type, type in the category details, and save it. And then that piece of data will now be captured on that second step. Now, if I save this workflow, it automatically is applied, and you can then go and look at that change to the process, evaluate it, test it, and so on, and see if it's going to work for you. You can also pass out the link to your users, and they can check it for you. They can test it and give you feedback on it. And as you can see, by using this kind of forms-based definition, it's very easy and productive and quick to create these processes, create drafts, get them out to your workforce, and get feedback on them. Now, we're constantly developing FlowForma, and we have a number of different ways of defining the process. So this is our standard approach, but we also have a flowchart style editor where you can edit the process via a diagram and so on. And then we also have a method of doing it where you can define it by looking at the actual end user form. So let me quickly show you what that looks like. This is a system that is currently in development in FlowForma. So basically you can see what that process actually looks like as you're building it. So as you alter the steps in the process, change the order of steps in the process, it automatically is reflected on the screen so that you can see straight away what the end user is going to see when they go into this process. Okay, just I know that we've very short on time, so just let me very briefly cover off some other points. That the process that you design here is usable via a web browser, but straight away it's also usable via a mobile device. So many of our clients access FlowForma via their mobile devices, and they see the same view of the process that they would see if they were using a desktop. But it's altered, of course, for mobile screens so that it automatically is usable on touch-sensitive screens. The other thing to say is that we also have a dashboard builder, so that, for example, here we have a dashboard for customer onboarding, and we can see various processes of various statuses. Also have a holistic view of all the customer onboarding statuses, processes at the different stages that they're at, and various other details in here. But this system, just like the forms that I showed you earlier on, how they were configured using a no-code designer tool, this is also configured using no-code design, and this dashboard here was created in just 40 minutes using a no-code designer. So one of the great things about using a no-code designer is that it's very productive. So you might say, well, our business users don't have the time to work on these processes. Well, using our no-code designer, you'll find it's the most productive tool on the market. It's very, very quick to actually create fully working systems using our dashboard designer and our flow designer. Now, there's many other features in the system, but I think for a full demonstration, the best thing to do is to contact our services via our website and request a demonstration, and we'd be very happy to give you a full, more detailed demonstration.
Paul, that was a great demonstration, and sorry that you were tight on time, because I know there's so much to show, but I think you made a great point about if anyone is interested in seeing a bit more, that they can request a demonstration, or we do have process accelerators as well, you know, which the likes of that onboarding process that you showed, an individual can implement that into their free trial environment and, have a play around and, update and change things to fit their organization. So I think that's great. Thanks so much, Paul. I know we are tight on time, so we might just jump into one or two questions for the end of the webinar today. So I've jotted a few down. So Paul, the first one I might ask you is, someone is asking here, and maybe you haven't thought this far ahead, or maybe you have, but what are your process automation predictions for 2022?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that we really will see an acceleration of adoption of this technology. That what was clearly shown in the Forrester predictions was that in 2 years' time there'll be an increase. There's already an increased interest in digitization, but in 2 years' time that will be an increase in digitization. And I think because of the impact of the pandemic and the way it's becoming clear that we have now got a permanent change, in terms of working practices and so on, the move to digital processes is just going to increase over time. So if we look into 2022, we'll actually see a further increase in adoption of digital processes and a further demand for change, and a demand that's going to be difficult to meet, because at the end of the day, with many process automation tools that they're requiring IT resources to configure them, they really are going to reach a limit. In fact, I think they've already exceeded their limits. So you'll have to look at alternative resources to help with that digitization strategy. And that's where FlowForma comes in, because of our no-code approach, because of our focus on business developers to automate their business processes. I think that's something that will really become much more important in 2022, because you will not have the IT resources to do it. You'll have to resort to your business people to actually basically become self-sufficient and start digitizing their own solutions.
Great, thanks, Paul. Gary, maybe you can take this one here. Someone is asking if they are ready to kickstart with a tool like FlowForma, where do they start? Maybe you can share some tips. What's your best practice?
I think from a FlowForma perspective, the most effective and efficient way would be to engage FlowForma via our Sure Start onboarding process. So, I mean, Sure Start is, I suppose, it's targeted at getting a new customer up and running as quickly as possible. So time to value is really important for us. So that means getting them fully enabled, becoming self-sufficient, capable of building the flows themselves in the tool, and getting their first process live, tested and live. And we typically target 4 to 6 weeks time frame for that, depending on the customer's availability, the resources. But that's what we aim at. So the Sure Start program is probably the best way and quickest way to get up and running and get started.
Great, thanks. Paul, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
No, absolutely. I think that it's so important to get started, and I think one of the things that we've done in FlowForma is to try and make that process just as easy as it possibly can be. And it's through the design of the product itself, it's through the services that we offer, such as Sure Start, and our whole approach of allowing people to trial the software and so on. It's trying to make that difficult jump to get started as easy as possible. And you'll find once you get started, you'll definitely want to continue on, and you'll definitely want to increase the usage and increase the returns that you're going to get from digitization.
And it's interesting, we're often surprised the feedback from the business users who, typically would equate, getting up and running as, requiring to work with skilled IT resources or developers. And the feedback, I haven't gone through the process of how self-sufficient they feel and how enabled they feel and ready to start taking on the next processes. So, but they go into it quite often thinking, wow, this is a bit over my head. I haven't got the skills for this. I don't have an IT background. But actually, that's the whole point of the tool, right? Is to enable such users.
I think it really eases their frustration. Like many of the people that we work with are a little frustrated by the pace of change, which is restricted by having to be dependent on IT resources. So when they remove that dependency, they can change a whole lot faster at the speed that they need to remain competitive.
And from the other side, actually, from an IT perspective, they love it as well because they can literally hand it to the business. It's so little overhead from their perspective. It sits in SharePoint, and they can hand it over and get on with their, the rest of their day job and their other priorities. And it removes that demand on their services. So, we see demand from both sides, but I think from the business users, they're always pleasantly surprised.
Very quickly, and I know we're running at the end of time, but just very quickly, people might be thinking that, just anticipating questions, people might be thinking that, how do you do all this and manage risk? Because if you're giving all this power to those end users, how can you actually manage risk to ensure that those innovations that they're driving and the changes that they're driving are not going to be a detriment to the business? And we've actually developed specific modules to help with that. So we have our governance module, which unfortunately we didn't have enough time to show you today, but it provides guidelines and so on to end users to manage development of manage business developers so they can develop solutions that are not going to have a negative impact on the business. But more of that, I guess, on the next webinar.
Yeah, definitely. We have a great governance webpage. If people are interested in that, they can check that out on the website as well. But sorry, we might not have gotten to everyone's question. But we will get back, and feel free to, pop over an email if you have any further questions for Paul or Gary. I'll pass them through to them. You can send them into the info box and I'll send them their way. But yeah, before we end, I just want to say thank you so much to Gary and Paul for joining us today. Really great insights, and great to look back on the predictions that we chatted about 8 months ago, and we can see that the trends are still there, and I think the pace is just getting quicker and quicker. But for our audience, thank you for joining. The full Forrester 2021 DPA report is available to download in your resource panel as well, and there's a lot of great information and stats in there if you'd like to have a read of that. I'd also recommend a 14-day trial of FlowForma, so you can do this through the FlowForma website, which is flowforma.com/trial. There again, you can have a look at the FlowForma tool itself, look at our process accelerators, and if you need a demonstration after your trial or before your trial, feel free to reach out. We can get that arranged for you. But yes, there will be a short survey at the end as well. We'd really love for everyone to fill it out, just so we can update and keep our webinars as fresh and as interesting as possible. But for today, I want to say thank you again to Paul and Gary, and thanks for everyone to joining. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.